What is up, everyone? Parox here, and today I'm going to be going over everything about the capture circle and capping and defending your cap in World of Tanks. Now, the reason for this video spawned from one of my clanmates talking about what he saw in some of the players and what they could do better, and one of those things was about knowing when to, go back to defend or cap and stuff like that. And this is kind of a big problem because, even for me, because I've lost so many games. Like, I can't even count the number of games that I've lost because I was like, oh, we don't need to cap, we don't need to go defend cap. You always need to defend the cap, always. But anyway, in this video, I'm just going to be going over some basics, like when it's appropriate to cap, capping tactics, defending your cap. And hopefully by the end you'll have a much more knowledge of when it's appropriate and what to do with capping. Alright, so first I want to talk about the basics of capping. Now, these first times are for standard and assault games. So if you have one person capping the base, it'll take 1 minute and 40 seconds. If you have 2 people capping the base, it'll take about 50 seconds. And then if you get 3 people on the cap, it'll take 33 seconds about. Now, the time it takes to cap doesn't decrease the more people you add after 3. So 3 is the max people that you can have on the cap for the timer to speed up. But the benefit of having more people is that the cap points are distributed among all of them. So if you reset some guy on the cap circle and there's only 3, then you got rid of, let's say, 1/3 of the cap points. Let's just pretend that they all have the same amount. But if there were 6 people on the cap and you reset one of them, you only reset 1/6 of the cap points. So the more people you pile on there, especially in endgame situations, it can be very difficult because the enemy team can't reload in time to shoot and reset all of you effectively. Now, for encounter games, since there's only one cap, the timer does get a little bit more lengthy. For only one person capping on encounter, it takes 4 minutes and 10 seconds. 2 people is 2 minutes and 5 seconds. And then 3 people is 1 minute and 23 seconds. Another way to think about this is on standard and assault. For every one person you have on the cap, the cap points increase 1 per second. And then for 2 people, 2 per second, 3 people, 3 per second. And then for encounter, for 1 person, you get 1 point every 2.5 seconds. For 2 people, 2 points every 2.5 seconds. And then 3 people, 3 points every 3.5 seconds. So it all depends on how many people you have on the cap, and that's essentially 1 point per person per second, with a maximum of 3 points a second, divided among how many people are on the cap. And also, don't think that as soon as the cap bar reaches 100% that you won. There's a 5-second delay from when you stop the cap, well, not stop the cap, cap all the way, and to when the game ends. So if you and the enemy are both capping in a capping race, if it takes them less than 5 seconds to also get to 100%, then the game's going to end in the draw. Also, if you're the last person alive and you're trying to cap out, if the timer gets to 100 full and you die, you'll still lose because you died and there's no one on your team. Even though the capture bar was all the way full, it didn't meet that 5-second delay at the end to when the game ended. I only know about this because it's happened to me once, and it sucked because I was celebrating. I thought I won. I did so great, and then I lost, and I was like, wow, this sucks. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is when it's appropriate to cap. I see so many people capping at the wrong times, and it just goes way south from there after you essentially mess up the kind of flow of the game. So what you really need to be good at, I'd say, is how to read the flow of battle. And I made a video about reading the minimap. I talk more in depth about what things mean, what to watch. So you can click that little video up in the top there to go to that. But just some general things here when looking out for when to cap. If you see that the game is close and you're not really sure if you can win just by killing them all. Maybe the enemy has a more advantageous position or more map control than you. You can get on the cap, force them out of their advantageous positions to maybe move to a more unideal location to try to reset the cap. I know in a lot of situations I'll be in this great spot killing a bunch of dudes, and it'll get kind of close and then they'll start capping. Well, if I want to win, or at least have a chance of winning, I have to pretty much stop what I'm doing and go find a new position that's fairly limited, because there's only so many spots you can shoot the cap from on each map. Alright, so to sum up, the first time when it's appropriate to cap would be to lure the enemy out of their positions. Now, you don't necessarily have to go in with the intention of capping and winning the game right there, but all you can do is hop on cap for a little bit, enough time for the enemies to get out of their locations. Hop off cap if you think it's going to be unsuccessful because they're just going to come and kill you, then you can do that. But luring them out of their kind of nuzzled up positions is a pretty good use of the cap. Another time would be when you just need to straight up win because you're going to lose otherwise. Alright, so the second major use of the cap circle would be to actually cap and win the game. And you usually want to do this when there's no other strategy or way that you could possibly win. You're outnumbered in tanks and HP, and you just want to win the game because winning is awesome. So what you want to do in this situation is don't just put one guy on there like we did before when we wanted to lure the enemies out of their hiding spots. If you have enough people for this first option, what you can do is put 3 people on the cap and then screen with other tanks. Now, what I mean by screening is you got the 3 guys on cap, they're just going to sit there, and there's going to be like 2 or 3, maybe you only have 6 guys left on the team at this point to go out and essentially screen the guys on the cap. And they go out not necessarily to live, but to distract the enemy for long enough for those 33 seconds to run out, and then your team wins. Alright, so in the next part of this video, I am going to be talking more specifically about capping tactics. Now I say tactics, it's more about positioning, but I guess you could consider them tactics. I did go over the screening strategy earlier, but that's because it kind of went with that particular capping situation. You don't really want to screen every time. Sometimes you can't afford to screen every time. So these next parts are going to be every time you cap, you should do these things. You should use your cover wherever cover you can find. You need to know where to sit in the cap, and you need to know how to position yourself with multiple capturers inside the circle. So first things first, we're going to talk about using cover, and to illustrate all of these capping techniques, I guess, we're going to be using the southwest spawn on Kharkov. There's a couple of good examples in this cap circle that I think would be the most beneficial to demonstrate with. A lot of the cap circles are just completely out in the open, and it's more of a view range game about resetting. But in Kharkov, you got solid cover in there, and you have like a little hole where you can hide in. So the first thing up is using cover, and this can be anything from tanks to the building to terrain irregularities to hide yourself, or maybe just a part of your tank. So for instance, if you were, say, in a T62A or something really short like an ELC maybe, going into that hole would be really beneficial, because in the case of the ELC, you can barely even see out of it, and the T62A, the turret is like a freaking rock, so you'll just sit there with your turret outside and bounce stuff all day long until an E3 shoots like APCR at your face. And maybe for some larger tanks that wouldn't necessarily benefit from hiding in that little hole being out in the open, say like an E100 that has a nice flat turret, so it's not really going to be very beneficial to be hauled down, you could use some more hard cover like that rubble building right there and hide behind that. Now that leads us into the next topic, which is about where to sit in the cap. Like, yeah, that's great, there's like a couple spots to hide behind, but you need to know when you can hide behind each one of those specific things. So let's have a hypothetical situation here. You're in the cap circle, and the enemies have wiped through your base, and they're not going to cap. They're just going to come and kill you because you're the last guy left, and that's what they feel like. That can be dangerous sometimes, by the way. If the last person's a really good player and you go in one by one, and you're low health, you can still win. So just cap if you think they're good and they have a lot of kills and they're just going to wreck your face. But anyway, back on topic. The enemy team has pushed through your base, killed all your arty, and you're the last dude left. And you're sitting on their cap. So they're going to come sweep down the 0 line since they were just in their base. No, they were just in your base. They're coming back to their base. So they're in that little donut hole area, and they're coming down the J line. Now, you have 3 options. You can sit in that little hole behind that building, or it's kind of difficult to see, but there's a little bit of room to hide not behind, but in the line of sight from them to you. There's that building there. So you could use the circle if you have a really hard turret. That would keep your hull exposed the entire time. So if you're in a tough turreted tank, that'd probably be your best option. There is no way that hiding by that rubble pile is a good option in this case, because as they're coming down that road, they're just going to have free shots at you. You might be able to hide behind that rubble pile a little bit if you backed as far away as you can without getting out of the cap circle. And there is another mechanic like that, where your entire tank doesn't have to be in the cap circle. It's only part of your tank. I haven't done enough research or figured out what part of your tank has to be inside, but I believe it's about half has to be inside the circle for you to be capping. So you can use that rubble pile if you're on the left side and you back up just until half of your tank is in there. You might be able to side scrape off there too. But the main part that I would probably use if there's some tanks coming down the J line would be to the very left part of the cap. If you know no one's going to come from the 2, 3, 4, 5 line, and you just hug over there, you are giving the enemies a harder time, and it's going to take them longer to come and get you. Because in the case of the rubble pile or the hole, you're in their line of sight right away. But if you're over on the left cap circle, they have to go further up to get their line of sight around that building to be able to shoot you. And that could potentially be the time it takes to win the game. Now, yeah, this is one very specific situation, but you need to think about kind of these tactics. Say, what can I hide behind? Where are my enemies coming from? That's the key part here. Where are your enemies coming from? So if they were coming down the 2, 3, 4 line, and no one's coming from the J line, use the right side of that building, or what was a building, now is a rubble pile, and they're not going to be able to shoot you for a long time. They pretty much have to drive in the cap to be able to reset you. And what you want to do is just take this and apply it to every time you're capping. Think where they're coming from, what you can hide behind, and which position will maximize the time that you are in the cap before you get reset. There's one last thing I wanted to mention with capping tactics. That's how to position yourself when there's more than one person in there. We just went over how to find a spot for yourself if you're the one guy in there, but it changes a little bit when there's more than one person on the cap. So say there's 3 people. I know a lot of people I've seen have just kind of sat in their own little spot, and that's it. What you ideally want to do if there's no arty, because if there's arty and you're all next to each other, that's going to be a bad time. When there's arty, you want to spread out as much as you can, so that way the arty doesn't have a chance to splash 2 of you at the same time. But if there's no arty, hopefully there will be no arty, you can position yourself in a way where the first person that gets on cap, that's going to be the person that has the most cap points. And you want to protect that person the most. So what I recommend doing is getting the person who has the most cap points kind of in the back. So let's use this rubble pile again. If they're coming from, say, the J line, I'll make it a little more difficult on the cappers. If they're coming from the J line, you can position yourself near that rubble pile again, on the left side of it, and have 2 of the tanks that got there later in the front. That way if they get reset, they might lose their cap, well they will lose their cap points, but you still have all of yours. And since you're nice and protected behind your teammates, it's going to make it more frustrating. And the enemies have to drive all the way to reset you because you have the most cap points. Alright, one last tidbit of capping tactics, I'm just remembering stuff as I'm going on here, is if you're in a more open map where the enemies can't see you right away, do not fire just randomly or, you know, just to try to get a shot off. None of these tactics are like for sure 100% definite, except for some things like, you know, capping is good for winning and screening and stuff like that. The more specific ones like this are a little, have some gray area kinda. So in general, you don't want to fire while you're sitting on the cap if you know the enemies are going to spot you afterwards and if you haven't already been spotted. Because if you've already been spotted, then, you know, shoot, try to scare them away and kill them. But if you haven't been spotted, generally it's not a good idea to risk your camo and your life to try to get just a shot off on the enemy. The only point where it might be more beneficial to shoot and get spotted is when there's only a couple of enemies left or one, and they're kind of spread out. If that one guy coming towards you is on low health and you can kill him with one shot, you know, shoot, you'll get spotted, you might kill him, and then you can move around and go dark again. And then you can repeat the same thing for the next guy and the next guy. Alright guys, and the last part about this video is going to be about defending your own cap. Now, as soon as you see that little red bar up on the top of the screen that says like a friendly base capture, you just want to go back right away. Because for some reason it always takes longer than you think it's going to take you to defend the base. I know I've lost so many games because I was just like, you know, I'm going to kill this one guy and then I'm going to go back just to get this dude out of here. I hope it'll help us win this flank a little more. Because the main issue with fighting on a flank and then like, oh crap, they're capping and then I have to go back and defend, is that once some people leave, that flank just becomes considerably weaker if a couple people left. And then if you don't get back in time to destroy the dudes on the cap, then you just lose anyway. So I think it's best to go back and reset the cap as fast as you can, because I can't even count the number of games I've lost because we've got out and capped. It doesn't happen super frequently, but it happens frequently enough that it can be pretty frustrating when it does happen. So the main points that you want to keep in mind when, like, throughout the game, not even when the enemy starts capping, you want to know, or at least try to figure out where the enemies are at all times. So what you want to do is keep an eye on that mini map. I have a perfect example of this actually that happened the other day on Westfield. Our entire team was heading down the we spawned on the south, entire team heading down the west, and it's a pretty obvious example right there, but we didn't see a lot of dudes, so they were either in the town or in the East Hill area. And when we figured out that they weren't in the town, it was pretty obvious where they were, but a lot of us just kept going, one, to get to their cap, because in this situation, rushing towards their cap is not a bad idea, especially if you know that a lot of them are going towards your cap. So getting retaliation cap pressure on their cap's pretty good. But unfortunately, I didn't go back in time, and I was probably one of the few people who actually went back to reset the cap, and that was pretty unfortunate. Now the next thing is kind of difficult to explain, but I'll try my best here. So if you know that the enemy knows where you are, then they'll try to make a move to like go to your cap if they know no one is there. I think I worded that right. Basically, if you're looking at the minimap and you don't see any tanks around you, but there was enough tanks that your entire team has killed, let's say like 10 of your guys got spotted and only 2 of them got killed, well, the enemy knows where those 10 of you are for sure. And if they know where you are, and you know that they know where you are because you are aware that your team has gotten spotted, then you should automatically be thinking about going back to the cap, or at least thinking about, well, what's the enemy gonna do now that they know where a majority of our forces are. And chances are, if there's a crap ton of you on one flank, like in this situation, they're going to push to your cap. Because you have an overwhelming force, why would they try to fight you where you have a majority of your team when they could just cap out and win? Alright, just to review some of the basics here, you just want to know the amount of people on the cap and how long that amount of people will take to cap. You want to know when it is appropriate to cap, whether you want to draw out the enemies or simply just win the game quickly. And you want to utilize those capping tactics. Look for cover in the cap. Try to get yourself in a nice position while sitting in the cap, making it harder for the enemies to hit you. And know how to position yourself with multiple cappers. And always, 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 always defend your cap. Make that your #1 priority. Because most of the time, if you just stick to the flank where you're at and people are capping, not enough people will be motivated to go back and reset the capture circle. And you want to do this by keeping an eye on the minimap, hopefully realizing that once the enemy knows where a majority of your team is, they're also going to be making plays to utilize that information, whether it may be just completely outflanking you or going and trying to cap your base. And that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I know it's a little long. I didn't know I could talk for 20 minutes about the cap in World of Tanks, but I just wanted to get everything that I knew about capping strategies and all that stuff out into one video. So if you guys enjoyed, if you learned something new, be sure to hit that like button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.